All right, welcome back, everybody, to the A to Z Poll podcast. It is Championship Monday. After months of blood, sweat, tears, uh, a lot of tears, a lot of blood. It's been a great, crazy, amazing college football season, and we are finally going to get to see the Ohio State Buckeyes take on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish at in Orlando, Atlanta, Georgia, to determine who takes it all. Now, before we get into our official game predictions, we have some housekeeping. First off, if you like this kind of content, if you like college football, throw me a subscribe, throw me a like, comment. What do you think? Who's going to win tonight? Um, and secondly, there's just some other things that we need to discuss. So today we are going to go over four topics. Firstly, the coaches voted on a couple things, and we're going to talk about one of them that I think is very important. Secondly, uh, kind of want to look over and examine how this first iteration of the 12 team playoffs went. Did it go well? Did it flop? Is this worth keeping, or is there some real changes that need to be made? Three, my idea for the perfect schedule moving forward. I have an idea for what I think the schedule should look like that would help with all this kind of parity. And finally, we're going to get into the predictions of who I think is going to win the national championship, how I think the game's going to go, and just some things, just some things to look for while you are watching the game. So, firstly, the coaches voted on changing the early transfer window to there only being a late transfer window, and I think that this is a very good thing. I think that this gives players much more of an incentive to stay at their school a little longer and gives the schools a little more incentive to get their players to stay. Um, by keeping uh by keeping that window closed, you get the biggest example that comes to my head first is Bo Parabola in Penn State. I'm sure he didn't want to leave Penn State as the backup quarterback for this playoff run. James Franklin said it himself. He probably wanted to stay, but there's only so many quarterback spots, and if you wait till the second transfer window, you're now competing with a whole nother class, plus the people who have already transferred and are been told they're already going to fill the position. So, and then on the other hand, if just say Drew Aller were to go down and they needed a backup quarterback, now they're out a backup quarterback. So I fully agree that the transfer window should not be open until the season is completely over. Whether or not you agree the season should be this long is a completely different situation. But at this point, the season, at this point, it is, I think, a very good thing that the transfer window is now going to be much later. Again, it also incentivizes players to stay as opposed to leaving so that they can, maybe let's get back to this kind of having school pride and working your way up to a starting role. I know everybody's in a different situation, but I think this will be overall a positive thing for the sport. Uh, secondly, second thing we're going to talk about is I kind of want to look at how this 12 team playoff turned out. Do I think it was a success? Do I think it was a failure? How did it go? And I think that this was awesome. This was a great success. And I think part of it comes down to how crazy this season was, and I think NIL played a big part in this, where parity was everywhere, right? You had teams like Alabama who in the past might have been a shoe-in, but because other teams are getting better, they're just not. I think that changing it, I know there's been talks about changing the format of the playoff. I think that changing it would be a pretty big mistake right now. Because I think that this format will eventually work better. Now, I know none of the conference championship champions won, but like, okay, that's Oregon, who everybody agreed was the number one seed, Georgia, who again, everyone was thinking was a really good team. So those two, I don't think anyone was arguing they should have been in getting that first round bye in the second round already because they won their respective conferences, the conferences that everybody thinks are the best conferences. Yet Georgia lost by a bigger margin than Indiana did to Notre Dame. Next, you get the idea of Boise State and Arizona State. Now, Arizona State gave Texas a run for their money, and besides a potentially bad targeting or non-targeting call, that game could give Arizona the win, which would make you think, oh, they were worth it. A Texas team that a lot of people were like, oh, this team could absolutely make a run and win the national championship, almost lost it to Arizona State, who people were like, they shouldn't even be in the playoffs. Why do we even have, especially not a first round bye? Um, so I think if that happens, you silence a lot of the voices. And then the last team, which I guess was the third team, but I'm talking about them last, was Boise State losing to Penn State. I do think that Boise State should not have been the third seed. That being said, now they're going to be in the Pac-12, and I'm still not sure how the Pac-12 is going to be treated, whether or not they're going to be treated as a G5. If we're going to go back to a Power 5 format. My guess is they're still going to be considered um, in a similar role to Mountain West. I think that it was kind of a miscarriage by the committee to make them the third ranked team in the playoff. I think you do have to make it a set rule that the top four teams need to come from the Big Ten, Big 12, ACC, and SEC. I think if that happens, then you have Boise State facing Texas, and I think that at the very least makes it a tougher road for a team like Penn State, who got to face uh, SMU and Boise State moving forward. I also think that, like many things, things don't work out perfectly the first year. I think if we let this go for a few years, you're going to see teams start to figure it out. And when programs believe they have chances, they'll be more willing to spend money. And when they're more willing to spend money, they'll be more willing to, there'll be more teams that are competing at that higher level and competing for a playoff spot every year. I can tell you right now, Southern Methodist, SMU, they're going to be a perennial playoff team. They're going to be very, very good because we've seen them. We've seen what Dallas does when they spend money, right? The Pony Excess. I don't know if anyone's seen that 30 for 30, but they were one of the best teams in the country. They were paying players more than they were making in the NFL. And now they're allowed to do that, which is the crazy part, right? If they were always allowed to do that, they probably would still be a perennial powerhouse. But there's a lot of money in Dallas and a lot of money, and a lot of wealthy alumni in Central Texas that I think really want to see the Mustangs win a national championship, especially after what happened given the death penalty in the late 80s, early 90s. Um, so with that being said, I think letting this go for a good 4, 5, 6 years. I know they're going to revisit it after next year, but letting it go in its current format, I think would be a beneficial thing. Maybe make that one change of dictating that it has to be a P4 team in the top four slots. But that being said, I think we're going to get into an age of much more parity, or at least money-driven parity in college football. There will, I think, be teams that just don't care or programs that don't care and just don't want to spend the money to make their programs elite. But there might be some examples, Southern Methodist, who want to. It's kind of a crazy world we live in now with the NIL. Uh, where the Maryland jersey made me think of this, like Kevin Plank, the owner of Under Armour, he went to Maryland. If he decided he could get, the top 10 recruits to go to Maryland just based off how much money he has, right? I know there's other factors to it besides that. Maybe some players really want to go where they want to go, but it's kind of crazy the amount of power that one person with a willing and big checkbook can do to a program. So overall, 12-team playoff, I think was a success. I also like the fact that in the national championship, we have two teams that were not part of the top four, and in previous years just wouldn't have even gotten a chance to compete in the national championship or in the playoff, and are now in the national championship. Uh, Taking a step back from the national championship really quick, I have I had a thought baby the other day. I had an idea of what I think the perfect schedule could be, and there's maybe perfect is not the right word, but what I think the optimal schedule should be. And I wrote it down. So we're gonna go through it like this. So 12 weeks, right? We have 12 weeks. Week one, this would be for a P4 team. So week one, you get to you play a random G5 team. Not random, but you would play a group of five team in a conference that would rotate. So just say CUSA plays the SEC one year, the next year CUSA would play the ACC. You would then play the team that finished closest to you in the rankings in that G5 team as your warm up. So if Georgia got to play the CUSA team, they would play Jacksonville State next year as their warm up game. Weeks 2 through 4 are going to be similar format, finishing in the same or similar position as you, but for the other P4 conferences. So week two, um, again, we'll stick with the SEC as the example. Week two, the SEC would play their ACC opponent. Week three, they would play their Big Ten opponent. Week four, they would play their Big 12 opponent. So create some that would then create some uh, uh, some interdivisional games that actually like you don't have to have a benefit or drawback from it, and it would make the schedule makers' lives so much easier and the committee so much easier as far as actually seeing what they would be like against these other teams, right? We had a lot of people be like, "Oh, well," a lot of people. We had Lane Kiffin over there saying, "Oh, well, Ole Miss wouldn't have gotten blown out. Ole Miss would have gotten blown out, but then Tennessee went and got blown out." So like we just don't know, but we would have a much better idea about this if we allowed for something like this to happen. Week 5. Week 5, you get a FCS opponent. So you let an FCS team come and play you. I think that would be a good thing. Um, I would say FCS or G5 team, uh, depending on, maybe you have some in-state stuff you want to work with. Um, like Boise State might want to play Idaho, or Georgia might want to play Southern Georgia, or Georgia Southern, sorry. Week 6. So now we're pretty toned into the season. You have some good matches so far. Week 6 is rivalry week. So most teams have at least one rival. Play them that week, right? So West Virginia gets Pitt, uh, even if they're out of conference or in conference. If it's in conference, you can still even count it as a conference game. If it's out of conference, it's just out of conference. So, like I said, West Virginia plays Pitt, Nebraska plays Colorado. Um, Michigan and Michigan State play, or Michigan and Ohio State play, right? Any of it, Maryland Rutgers, because that's a now protected rivalry, and you can obviously mix and match however you want, right? Washington has a rivalry with Oregon and Washington State. Maybe they just make their Oregon game the last game of the season for the conference games, which week 7 through 12, right? The last 6 weeks of the season are going to be conference games. Now, with conference games, you are going to have uh, the caveat with this is that right there's up to 16 teams in some of these conferences. You're not going to see everyone every year, so you can only play a team 2 years in a row. Then you have to have a new. So you can at most have a home and away with a team before you have to completely not have them on your schedule until you've got through all the other teams. Therefore, you get to play every team within a 4-ish year span, 3, 4 year span, and you don't have to worry about, you know, avoiding teams. Now, I do think that you can keep some games every year. For example, Ohio State, Michigan. That game being the last game of the season every year, you could keep that. Army, Navy, well, they have their own weekend. Um, any of these rivalries that you might want to keep, right? Oregon, Washington, great example. Keep that as the last game of your season every season. That's fine. Then in the end of the season rankings, right? Instead of having a conference championship, have conference tournaments to determine the winner, and then the winners automatically get, their 1 through 4 bids, and then you rank everyone else accordingly for the last 7 slots. Um, and to not get rid of bowl games, make the conference tournament games sponsored by bowl games. Make like the semifinals of the Big Ten championship, the Pop-Tart Bowl. Who cares? That keeps the people who made the bowl series happy. It value still keeps the value of the conference championship, but it gives everybody a shot to make it, and it keeps everybody interested until the end of the year. Even if you suck the whole year and you know, I guess Vanderbilt was good this year. If you're Purdue, right, and you have 2 wins this year, if you then go in, you still have a chance to go in and play to win your conference. Now, is it likely? No. But I think that would cause a lot more interest. And I think also if you have more games like that, then you would then get to it would have a lot less time in between, right? It's been like 3 weeks since our last college football game. It's been 2 weeks. But these playoffs have really drawn on. I've enjoyed having a playoff game every so often, but again, these games have really drawn on, and it's been a really long time, right? We are way further than college football almost ever goes. Sorry if that was long and confusing, um, but that I think is what a good college football schedule should look like. Well, I think it will happen? Probably not. There's a lot of logistical stuff that I'm probably not really thinking of, that in the ways that it just wouldn't really work out. All right. That was a lot of words. That was a lot of me rambling and a lot of not talking about the national championship. Um, so in our last point of the podcast, not a super long one, but I think overall a relatively positive one. It wasn't one of those, the committee sucks, NIL sucks, everything sucks. Just a pretty good, a pretty positive podcast. That being said, let's put a bow on it. Who do I think will win the national championship? And I don't think it's that crazy to say that I think Ohio State will win. Notre Dame has some sort of magic on their side. I don't know if they made a deal with the devil or if they are just in the craziest luck streak ever. But Notre Dame is playing some crazy good football right now, and I think they have out physicaled their opponents, even bigger ones than them, in a lot of ways that I didn't think was possible, or that I didn't think they were capable of. I wrote them off pretty effectively after the Northern Illinois game, and that's my bad. That is, I'll take the blame for that. Right hand to God. Next time I'll be better. Um, and frankly, I've chosen against Notre Dame outside of last game all playoffs, right? I chose them to beat Penn State, but I chose them to get stomped by Georgia, and I thought they were going to lose a low scoring, tight one to Indiana, and they blew both those teams out, including getting that victory against Penn State. So after doubting them so much and finally coming around, I'm picking against them again, and I think that Ohio State wins this. Ohio State is over a score favorite. They're 8.5 point favorites. And it's Ohio State's game to lose. If they lose this game, it's because they shot themselves in the foot. It's because Ryan Day decided not to take calculated risks. And it does scare me a little bit to think that, okay, has a Ohio State has shown in the past that they have the capability of shooting themselves in the foot and that they might not want to take the risks necessary. That being said, this is just not the time that it's going to happen. I think that Ohio State, they finally hit their stride and they're playing like the team that I thought they were going to in the beginning of the season. You go all the way back. My first podcast, my first poll this year, I had Ohio State number 1, and I said that they are the most talented team in the country. And I think that an undefeated season, anything shy of an undefeated season with a national championship win at the end of it, is a failure of a season. And I kind of still agree with that. They lost to Michigan. They lost a couple of games this year. I don't think they should have lost. Uh, but they did, and here we are now. Uh, they're still in the national championship. They're still in it. And in the 11th hour, I think they can salvage this season. Um, their team is very, very expensive, right? They spent a lot of money. They went out and got the number 1 rushing recruit in the country at the time, a rushing transfer in the country at the time, Quinshon Judkins, who I feel like we really forgot about. Obviously, you got Ashton Jeanty, you got Cam Skattebo, you got RJ Harvey, you got, everybody who had a phenomenal season. Um, but I do really think that we're forgetting Quin Quinshon Judkins had like 1,400 yards at Ole Miss as a freshman. Like he's really, really talented. He just wasn't in a position this year to stat pad, right? Stat pad, to accumulate stats, right? Him and Travion Henderson were splitting carry time. And honestly, this offensive line was atrocious for a lot of the season. And that was mostly due to injury. But again, I feel like we're really just forgetting how good he is, how good this running back tandem is. and just some of the talent that's floating around there. And if we get the Will Howard that we got against Michigan, they're going to lose this game. If we get the Will Howard we got when he was at Kansas State against TCU 2 years ago in 2022, we're going to get in the Big 12 championship. We're going to get it might get ugly. Um, so that's my official prediction. Ohio State. I think it's going to be a high scoring one. I'm thinking Ohio State like 45 to 28, 45-27. I think Ohio State dumps points on them. Um, that being said, Notre Dame has shocked everyone in the past, and so has Ohio State, but for completely opposite reasons. Um, all right, if you made it this far, thank you for watching. Again, make sure you like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Who do you think is going to win in the national championship? Next week, or the following week, I will be coming out with my way too early top 25. I've seen a lot of them out already. I think some of them are pretty ridiculous. Um, and the next episode will be some top 25s. We'll talk about my way too early Heisman. We'll talk about some big transfer news. And just we'll spend this off season, missing college football, but very much getting excited for the next season, right? Don't be sad because it's over. Be sad because it's football and it happens every year. And don't be sad. Be happy because it's college football and it happens every year. And we'll get it again next year. Uh, that being said, have fun. I hope everybody gets to see the game tonight, and I hope your team wins.